good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and today I'm joined by Mr. Terence Corrigan. Terence, how are you doing, sir?
I'm good, Nicholas, and yourself?
I'm pretty good as one can be on a Monday. And I'm also joined today by Mr. Chris Hutton. Chris, how are you doing?
Afternoon, Nicholas and Terence. Doing well, thanks. Enjoying the very exciting warm weather in Johannesburg. So I think the next month or so is going to be very good from my perspective. So let's do it.
So of course, Chris is playing games with us all here because it has been soggy and wet and very sort of Englishy weather, I think, the last couple of days. But nonetheless, we must soldier forth. Nothing stops the news. And our first story for today is discussing a minister who I think all three of us have thrown a lot of, as the kids say, thrown a lot of shade at over the past couple of years. And this is Minister Ibrahim Patel. He said recently in a seminar discussing economic empowerment that resistance to transformation is stymieing the economic hopes of millions of South Africans. He said that legal challenges to the South African government's policies aimed at advancing BEE were short-sighted and undermined hopes to grow the economy sustainably. So this was said at a broad-based Black Economic Empowerment conference on Friday. He basically, this comes in the wake of a ruling by the Con Court, which made null and void a large number of BEE regulations, and we talked a little bit about that on last week Monday's show of the Daily Friend, and how some government entities had reacted to that. And so basically here the idea is that by holding up BEE, what's really happening is that the civil society groups, people like us and the IRR, are really continuing to keep Black people impoverished and the economy in much the same structure as it always has been, and that we're not going to get any real inclusive economic growth until such a time as BEE is allowed to go to its full extent. And presumably that means the new piece of employment equity legislation and all that coming down the pike. So, Terence, what do you make of the minister's comments?
Well, completely expected. You see, for many years there was this shadow game that a lot of people used to play. Transformation should mean, and transformation doesn't mean it, but it means this. I think we need to talk plainly for the powers that be, and Minister Patel would be an exemplar there. It means the sort of racial redistribution of rewards, ownership, whatever. So yeah, in his mind, that is what needs to happen, and reality must conform itself. There's been a lot said over the pardon me, over the past 20 years about that's probably might be the first on-air sneeze we've ever had.
I think it might be, yeah.
Okay. Well, we went from Black empowerment in the 90s to BEE, Black economic empowerment in the early 2000s, to broad-based Black economic empowerment sometime thereafter, and each rhetorical iteration was meant to demonstrate how this thing was really the program to revolutionize society. Now, while composing some thoughts about the minister's statement, I found an interesting paper, which is actually on the Treasury website, from 2007, written about BEE, and it used the term NBBEE, narrowly based Black economic empowerment, and said, this created a lot of incentives for rent seeking and such like. And I think that there's a lot of sensitivity around that. Unfortunately, I don't think that a policy like this can avoid it. You can be in favor of it, you can be opposed to it, but this is not going to. You cannot make this thing broad based. What will benefit unemployed people is increased investment and increased job creation. A functional state, being able to educate your kids well at a no-fee state school. Those are the sort of things that benefit people broadly. Transferring ownership and equity and that sort of thing, that is by its very nature a very elitist thing. And as I say, looking back at this analysis from 2007, I think pretty much everything that was warned about at that time has now come to pass. I think on steroids, the Zondo Commission's report is a massive indictment on BEE. Now, the response was, well, it hasn't been implemented properly, but I just don't see something like this being implemented any differently. The incentives are all about a certain elite group of people who will take advantage of it. I don't think there's anything wrong with people people wanting to be wealthy, and I think maybe we should be hesitant to wag our little moral fingers in the air, if the opportunity exists for them to do so, using the taxpayer. The problem, of course, is that this introduces a lot of inefficiencies and perverse incentives into the economy. Once again, this paper, and I emphasize again, 2017, 15 years ago, said, for instance, the costs of goods procured on a preferential basis are likely to be higher. Well, yes, and that's basically what the legislation says. So you sort of get less of them. You get sort of less governance, less efficient governance, and the most durable type of upliftment, I think, for most Black people, most aspirant Black entrepreneurs, is to establish a small business and grow it into something large. But doing business in that environment is an absolute nightmare. I mean, simple things like basic security of your structure and your stock. The government can't guarantee that. So, I think there's maybe something of an irony here. If all things were equal, if the country was governed well, if the overall environment was conducive to making money, South Africa could probably take the hit and engage in what is essentially a form of rent seeking, very much like Malaysia did. But there would still be enough for the rest of us to get by. What we have is atrocious government, a very hostile environment for doing business and for entrepreneurship, and a rent-seeking culture bolted onto that. It's kind of like you can't make this stuff up.
Right, I think that's a really good point. A lot of the great success stories around the world that have transformed their economies have had a lot of corruption in them. China is still a very corrupt country, despite what the Communist Party of China says. South Korea, a great liberal democracy these days, is a very corrupt country still in many ways, at least compared to other liberal democracies. Thailand, Vietnam, it's the same story over and over again, but they have the policy environment, which means that you can cope with the corruption. The corruption hurts, but it doesn't kill the golden goose, so to speak. The problem with South Africa, as I think you correctly point out, Terence, is that the golden goose is strangled before it can even lay the golden egg in so many instances. So, Chris, one of the rhetorical shell games that seems to be being played by the minister here in his comments is this idea that BE somehow grows the economy, right? He's sort of saying we're not going to be able to have any, and he has the weasel word here, sustainable economic growth, if we don't have BE. So I assume he means by that if enough people aren't brought into the economy, which he claims that BE does, then we're going to have some kind of great social revolution from the poor, and that's going to overthrow society and destroy the whole market system, and we're going to have some kind of, communist dictatorship instituted. I'm maybe taking it a bit far, but I think that's the sort of general gist of how these arguments go. Why is that wrong?
I don't think Minister Patel should say that transformation efforts are being stymied or failing. I think that the state has, and including Minister Patel specifically, has succeeded very much in concentrating power in the hands of the politically connected and transforming the economy even more into an ever more fixed sort of pie in terms of who you know, not what business you can create.
Sorry, just on that point specifically, I cannot think of a government policy that has not been more aggressively pursued than transformation over the last 20 years.
Yeah, and it's not the kind of transformation that's actually inclusive or growth focused. It's the kind of transformation that's all about how much money do you donate to the ruling party, and then do you get the tender or not, or do you get the contract for 150 million during a global pandemic to make sure that it's given to your family instead of sort of giving information to the people about the virus that's moving around, all of that sort of stuff. In terms of BE itself, and the sort of point about, so the minister maybe trying to couch himself as this great defender of the market, and there's going to be social revolution and all that kind of thing. I mean, he's correct that when there's less economic freedom, people struggle to make wealth and money for themselves and find job opportunities. But of course, he won't tie that to the causes he won't see as his own policies and ideas. So he's right that it's going to increase the potential, I think, for social strife in coming months and years, as we saw last year in July, when there was already lots of desperation, hunger, grinding poverty, and it took a spark to sort of ignite that, whatever one puts that spark down to. If you have those conditions where you tell people, your lot in life is caused by someone else, or you don't have any agency or dignity, all that you're good for is a 350 Rand grant from the state every month, you don't actually have opportunities to create a business maybe, or look after your family and your community, then yes, you're going to see more desperation and strife in sort of future years to come. So he's right in that regard. Not that I want to really give him credit for that. He's probably just trying to cover himself and justify his comments and his ideas in a different way. It's always we care for the poor and the people, as though everyone is interchangeable, and just give us a little bit more money or a bit more control, and we'll redistribute you into prosperity again. We'll redistribute the economy into activity. I mean, we can implement now. I mean, government is looking at doing the Employment Equity Amendment Bill, which the RR has a campaign on. It'll effectively export what has been done to state-owned enterprises into the private sector. And if for some reason someone thinks what has happened in the public sector has worked, just wait for that to happen in the private sector as well.
I think that one can steal the words of the late P.J. O'Rourke, who talked about Russia's approach to politics, the feet firmly rooted in the abstract. Mm-hmm. And I'm also going to steal the words of the introduction to Mythbusters and say, I substitute your reality and I reject your reality and substitute my own. Mm-hmm. It's very much, it's all of a piece with localization, whatever. My ideological and political outlook as a politician is reality. Everything else is, some sort of perversion or conspiracy against that. I would take a slightly different tack, that I think that the redistributive efforts can be quite useful to in sparking growth. But what we this is just not it. I think that Chris can correct me. Didn't Milton Friedman say something about the test of a policy is not the nobility of its intentions, but the quality of its outcomes? Right. So, frankly, there's a sort of empirical test here. Has it contributed or not? And here's the thing to look at. The National Development Plan. One can be as critical as you want about it, but it did actually nail its colors to the mast on the kind of numbers we need. It said 30% investment, 30% of GDP needs to be invested by the time we get to 2030. I think last year it was 13.7. In fact, it's been going on a sort of more or less downward trajectory since 2008. 2013, for some reason, I'm actually quite interested to look that up, but bumped up again. But even, and they say, well, it's the pandemic. No, it's not the pandemic. We were at about 15 15.5, 15.6%. I'm not sure the exact number. Okay, I'll give them 16% in 2019. And that was actually worse than it was, under the state capture bonanza. So, yeah, one would have expected, to see something coming out of this.
Right,
So,
that's the bottom line.
Sorry.
Where are the jobs and economic dividend from pursuing BE as state policy for more than a decade and a half now? We just are not seeing the great benefit to Black South Africans or any South Africans from that one, except for the small group of politically connected people. And that's not a bug, that's a feature of BE.
Well, that's the point. It's not that the patient has cancer, it's that cancer is the essence.
Right, precisely. Okay, let's move on to our next story. And this comes from News 24. They have done a report. It's an exclusive from them saying that the investigating directorate is investigating South Africa's Secretary of Defense, Sonto Kujo, for theft, fraud, and money laundering. So apparently, when Sonto Kujo was head of the State Security Agency, it is alleged that she was involved in the stealing of 150 million rands from government coffers, and that this money was then spent in a large number of ways. One of the primary ones being that it was spent on buying real estate all over the country, and also so particularly in Pretoria, Johannesburg, Durban, and Cape Town, so basically in the metros. And that, and the story here is being very, it's not being very subtle, but still trying to keep it secret. By saying that some of the 150 million rand was used to finance the campaign of a senior female ANC politician ahead of the governing party's 2017 conference in Nasrec. Who could that be? Might be Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. But anyway, so this is a big amount of money gone, and it's from, the most secretive part of our government, which is our spy agencies, our state security agencies. And of course, I believe that this person was a appointee of Zuma. So, it's a disclaimer, of course, is that this is all allegations. Still, the investigation is still ongoing. But considering that what we've already seen happening in government so far, I wouldn't be surprised if this stuff turns out to be true. Chris, what do you make of this? 150 million rand is not a small amount of change.
Well, apparently our intelligence agencies and services didn't know that riots were going to happen last year in July, but maybe they at least knew where to invest in property. Maybe they know where they'll get the best returns on investment at the very least. So maybe we should give them credit for that knowledge that they have. Look, yeah, I mean, it's another symptom of intricately mixing the ruling party with the state and all apparatuses of the state. That's sort of I think a necessary consequence of what happens when you have that sort of, again, cater deployment on that level, when it's just about, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, and make sure you'll get all the money that you want to spend at your discretion. So don't worry about any particular oversight or anything like that. I speak under correction, so I don't know how it works exactly with when security services want to spend X amount, if they need to submit to a particular head, if they need to submit to Parliament or something. But maybe here again, there's another mark against Parliament for the lack of oversight that's been done the last 10 years, probably even a bit longer. So if someone wants to correct me there in terms of who should, if a particular watchdog or something like that should be covering that particular item. So it unfortunately points to maybe a failed check in that regard. But yeah, I mean, let's hopefully at least there was a good return, more than inflation, and make your money where you can.
Yeah, so Terence, I think Chris's point there about the integration of the state and the party as being part of the big problem here is completely correct. What are your thoughts on this story?
Yeah, it's just money. It's just money. I mean, isn't this where we ultimately end up? It's just money. Yeah, I think it's distressing that the Secretary of Defense and former honcho at the State Security Agency is mixed up in stuff like this. But to quote Iago from the Disney Aladdin movies, I'm going to keel over and die from not surprised. I think at some point you would just hope that a culture respectful of the duties of an official of the state could develop, but we're sort of nowhere near there. Last week I wrote a piece which some of our listeners may have read about why South Africa needs a new investment strategy, and I did that after reading President Ramaphosa's speech to the investment conference, and I said, it's gone beyond spin into a species of delusion. We can say, well, people need to know about how effective our fight against crime has been. I imagine many people with an actual stake in the country remember that in July last year, the state kind of absented itself while the country fell apart. Even at someone like Rebecca Davis, who, to quote her, doesn't have a libertarian bone in her body, saying, "What's the purpose of a government that doesn't govern?" So 150 million rand to advance the fortunes of someone within the ruling party. That's just the way we roll, folks. And look, and until people actually start going to prison for this, it's not going to stop.
No, exactly right. And I would be very interested to know which properties are owned by them. And I hope that this does come out in the investigation. So, of course, now this is going through an investigative process. It's been handed over to the Hawks and things. And we can only hope that the president, considering this is probably money going to the faction opposed to him, will, take action on it, at least for his own political benefit. But who knows if that's actually going to happen. But yeah, I'd be fascinated to know where this money was and what things are owned by the State Security Agency or its friends, because that might provide a lot of insight into some of the corrupt webs in South Africa's political and business space. Interesting stuff. All right, let's move on to our next story for today. And we're going slightly north in the continent now to talk about the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is one of the most troubled nations in the world, of course. I think it's it's usually in the bottom 5 for poorest countries on earth in per capita GDP. But it's a very big place. It's got a huge amount of resources. It's got 90 million people, which is quite a lot. Almost sort of a South Africa and a half, basically. And the DRC has officially been approved to join the East African Community this last week. So the DRC is already part of, I believe, SADC, the Southern African Development Community, which is, of course, what South Africa, Lesotho, our other neighbors belong to. But now it seems to be putting its foot into camps by also trying to get in on the East African Community. So the East African Community currently includes Rwanda, Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Burundi, and South Sudan. So there's a number of questions here. And Terence, let me start with you. The first question is this a good idea for DRC? And the second question is this perhaps showing a shift of where the balance of power in Africa lies, away from Southern Africa towards places like Kenya, places like Rwanda? What do you
look, it could be doing either of those. Africa has, I think, sort of 6 or 7 of what they call regional economic communities at various stages of functionality. One up in the north, whose name I forget, I don't think they've had a meeting in years. Whereas something like SADC, at least, goes through the summits and would agree that Mugabe was a great guy, with Botswana dissenting. The East African Community is probably the most cohesive. Uganda and Rwanda particularly have shown themselves in some ways, and I'm sure there's going to be people coming in on the chat to admonish me, to be economic reformers. Now, regional integration is very important for Africa's future, because most of our countries do not have the purchasing power to make them attractive investment destinations on their own. However, if you can combine 9 or 10 of these countries together, you have significantly sized markets. The idea of an African free trade area, I know Chris is very enthusiastic about that. I mean, that's also about taking a lot of small pools of resources and putting them together, and the overall proposition can start to look a lot more attractive. Now, that's well and good. I suspect, though, what the DRC is doing is opportunity shopping, hoping to have one foot in each camp, and to swing with whatever benefits may be available. These regional economic communities attract a lot of excitement from foreign countries and foreign donors, who I think quite correctly do see them as part of Africa's future. So there can be pools of development funding to be gained from either or. The problem is, and this is the DRC would not be the first one to do this, because Tanzania is also in both. Ultimately, if you are talking about establishing a kind of regional bloc, and particularly an internal market, a customs union or whatever, you need some sort of border against the outside world. And what both Tanzania and now the DRC have is foots in different camps, so that if things move in one direction, well, they're able to try and draw the benefits from one and pass some of those costs over onto their peers in the other. I remember visiting Uganda in about 2009 and speaking to a member of their parliament who was also involved with the regional integration story, and he said, "Look, ultimately, Tanzania was the issue. They've got to choose: are they Southern African or East African?" Because look, the East African community, some of those countries have started to align like visa regimes, so you don't just go to one country on holiday. You can go and see the gorillas in Rwanda, and you can go to the the savannah in Tanzania, or whatever. In others, you're looking at in West Africa, there's been some move towards harmonizing which side of the road people drive on. I mean, these are big things, big changes to make. And if the kind of borders and limitations of an economic bloc are not clear, you'll never get it off the ground.
So, Chris, just as a sort of final thought here, I do also wonder, and we've seen a lot of this discussion also in the African free trade stuff, how much of an actual difference some of these things make, because especially for a country like DRC, I suspect the big problems, it doesn't really matter what government policy is, because when you get to the border, you're going to get shaken down for a bribe, whether there's a tariff or not. What do you make of this move, and how much of a difference it's going to make?
Yeah, it's almost like thinking in the South African context, we should implement localization master plans, and we don't have to worry about ensuring that our rail doesn't get stolen. That's going to somehow unlock 5 to 10% economic growth, kind of thing. No, it's up to people and businesses and governments in those individual countries to adopt and infuse their own contexts with the ideas of the whatever agreement it might be, whatever sort of community of countries or free trade agreement it might be. Otherwise, it simply becomes, I think, a PR exercise. Then it can have conferences and say, "Oh, it's the 5th anniversary, it's the 10th anniversary, and XYZ. Look at how much investment we're getting," quote unquote, sort of thing. So I mean, one hopes, but I think we've come to learn the hard lesson. So let's see if they actually implement some of the requirements and prescript of the community, and whether that helps to stimulate some kind of growth.
Yeah, DRC is an interesting case for economic policy, because of how little control the central government has there. Although, of course, the problem in DRC is, the central government might not have control, but the local warlord does. So it's not like some sort of libertarian paradise either. Anyway, so that's all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for listening. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we will see you tomorrow on the Daily Friend Show. Cheers, everyone.